Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of spoken word, checking out tracks that have at least portions of them comprised of just spoken word, not singing, not rapping, not screaming, just speech. Today we're going to be looking at something off of Cynic's 2014 album Kindly Bent to Free Us. We're looking at the track Moon, Heart, Sun, Head. I don't know what those four words have to do with each other. Oh, well, actually we have moon and sun, and then heart and head. Okay, I see the relationship now. It just looked like a series of words prior to that. Glad I got that figured out, though. Let's dive into it, see what's going on with this track. Just a massive bass tone. The song's sort of all over the place. We've had a lot of different time feels, even though I think we've only had 2 tempos and 2 time signatures. Ramping up intensity prior to beat 1s, something I'm hearing a lot of. It wasn't definitely one of those songs that's going to take repeat listens. It has its own flow, and it's difficult to grab on a first listen. Really nice duet there between the guitar and bass. What an interesting chord to finish on.
So far, so good. But the truth is funnier than that. It is that you are looking right at the brilliant light now. That the experience you are having, which you call ordinary everyday consciousness, pretending you're not it, that experience is exactly the same thing as it. There's no difference at all.
Oh yeah. very cool having the voices in several different places. We have some channel panning on some of the background vocals. Is this just how it's going to end then? One quick note, I want to... Hello? Y'all go to my link tree, I guess, and also like, subscribe, ring the bell, because that's all scripted. I can't get rid of one without bringing the other. All right, we got a mid-video call to action here. That was weird. One quick thing I want to touch on is the background vocals there, particularly not the one saying heart, moon, heart, sun, head, but there was a long held out note that kind of drifted between notes. It did have a couple of quick note changes where it would hold out one note and then quickly move to like two down and then come two back up to where it was. And the intervals and the style of change, so when it comes to the way that notes end, there's a couple different ways to do it. There's harsher ways to stop a note, and softer ways to stop a note. You can stop a note with your air, you can stop a note with your tongue, you can stop a note with, well, different parts of your tongue and by placing them in different areas as well. Basically, any way to restrict airflow. And so normally we would have something like a T sound. Tut, tut, tut. You put the tip of your tongue to the roof of your mouth and it stops the note. Very harshly, very, very sharply. But there's another way to sort of get that harshness in. It's a harsh softness. I don't know how to describe it, but I think it's done in the back of the mouth somewhere. Because you can also kind of stop it with a cuss sound. And again, I don't know how to explain this muscularly. When there's a technique in instrument playing, I suppose it carries over to vocal training because I'm going to vocalize it for you, but I primarily know it for playing trumpet, called double tonguing, and it allows you to play notes really quickly, faster than you would be able to stop the air with your tongue or with your breath. And we use some muscles back here to create a K sound, and we alternate between a T and a K. So you have two ku, and you can play really fast notes that way. But like you can feel some, especially once you get faster, there's some muscular stuff going on back here, and I feel that same kind of soft, harsh stop going on in these runs. And there's a particular type of music that I hear this type of vocal movement in, and that's Indian music. We checked out a raga a few weeks ago. It might have been December, actually. I think it was last year. And there was some vocal stuff in that track, if I remember correctly, that had similar vocal technique to this. I find that really interesting because there's nothing else in the song that tells me that there's any type of Indian inspiration. I don't really hear any Indian instrumentation as far as traditional instrumentation goes. I don't hear any Indian harmonic work. All the inspirations to me stem from the genre of Western rock and metal. And then there's these these vocal runs where the note intervals and the technique both remind me of Indian music. And I don't know, it's an interesting thing right there. It kind of comes out of nowhere. It fits perfectly with what's going on there at the ends, but there was no foreshadowing to it. It kind of caught me off guard. Very neat idea. I guess that wasn't so much of a quick note, but still a note nonetheless. Next up. This is a track that wants it all in a lot of ways. It is very modern. It feels like a 2014 track in a lot of ways, not just production, but also composition. But it also feels like it takes a lot of inspiration from 70s prog rock. We have those really wide vocal cords that exist all throughout this track. We have the heavily drenched, the guitar is heavily drenched in reverb. There's basically many of the quieter sections feel like 70s prog to me, or at least that's where the inspiration is. They're uh, not fully a 70s prog song. I think in production they still sound too modern for me to necessarily think that, but the intent is there. But it's juxtaposed with modern rock and modern metal sounds. There is the more heavily distorted guitar that comes in, the heavy section. Ooh, even the bass, though. The bass kind of walks both realms because the bass tone generally hasn't changed much over the years. Not as much as like distorted guitar. You go back and listen to distorted guitar from 30, 40, 50 years ago, and it feels very different from the distorted guitar of 2000s, of 2010s, of 2020s. But the bass guitar generally feels the same. It's less sweeping of a change to the tone of it over the years. I think if you know what you're listening for, you can definitely say, "Oh, this was definitely a bassist from the 80s or from the 70s or something." And there's probably specific groups that have more unique bass tone to them, but on the whole, this was just a very nice round electric bass tone. I could place it in just about any era and even across many genres: rock, metal, even jazz. Probably even hear this in bass, especially not bass, golly, in pop music, particularly stuff closer to funk and disco, any of the revival movements for that. So, like, yeah, the bass helps tie things together. But initially, especially because it was paired with the quieter, proggier side of things, we had those vocal harmonies come in and the softer electric guitar and then that bass. Yeah, it felt very proggy to me at that moment, especially with some of the bass lines, which that is an area where compositionally it leans a bit to the past. But then we get these heavy moments, maybe hard rock, maybe not necessarily metal, maybe somewhere in the middle there between hard rock and metal, since that barometer's kind of shifted over time. I'm not going to get into the concept of genre. Anyways, what I'm saying is we have really soft sections that are more ambient and focused on harmony and melody, and then other sections that are booming and focused on groove and texture. We have sort of both worlds there. It doesn't just stop at having both of them, though. The song isn't content with having both existing. They want them both simultaneously, but you can't do that. You're not going to have something that's cohesive if you're trying to pair the quieter side with a heavier side, because you're going to get neither. It's going to simultaneously be loud and there's going to be this quiet thing in the corner. You're like, what is that doing over there? It's just not going to sound good. So what they do, though, is they jump back and forth between them rapidly. It is a roller coaster of a ride, the first 3 minutes or so of this track, because there's just no rhyme or reason to when we change the feeling of a song or the vibe of a song or even the time feel of the song. We just do, and there's a ton of pickup notes on this too, so if you're listening for the change to be a brand new bar, you're not going to get that either. And what I mean by a pickup note is that it's an idea that begins before beat one of a bar. What we often hear here is maybe we'll have, assume we're in 4/4, okay? And we'll be quiet on 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and then we're gonna get big on 3, 4, 1, and it's a nice little introduction to where we're going. But a lot of rock and metal tend to work within the bounds of the bar phrases. If we have a 4-bar phrase, those 16 beats are going to be one idea, and then beat one of the next bar will start the next idea, and it will probably go for 16 beats too, or some sort of grouping of 8 or 16. These guys consistently start the next idea before the bar begins, usually on beats 3 or 4, or when we are in 6 on 5 and 6, prior to getting into the next section. So it feels often that a phrase begins a little earlier than it actually does. And it took me a while to pick up on this, and it's what led to a lot of confusion at the beginning of the track, because not only were we changing between these two modes frequently, but I couldn't even figure out what the time signature was to estimate when those changes might happen. It was really difficult to find one throughout a lot of this, beat 1, until I started to pick up on the pickups. And then things started to click. Kind of. Because that's when I noticed that our time signature wasn't consistent. And I think that's what makes a lot of the opening work for me from an intellectual perspective. We play around with time feel a lot. I think our opening minute or so was in 6/4. But I don't know what the tempo was. It was constantly in flux. 1 minute we would be dragging, the next we would be speeding up, and it wasn't perfect half times and double times because that's easy to feel. That's easy to say, oh, instead of playing quarter notes, we're playing eighth notes, which are just half as long, so it's twice as fast. Or maybe we're going from quarter notes to half notes, which are twice as long, so now it feels half as fast. No, these were all different. So either they were using tuplets, or they were changing, well, they could have been changing time signature too, or they were changing tempo. And right now, having just listened to it once, I have no idea what was going on in that opening minute. It was bonkers all over the place. I was being thrust and thrown and lurched and dragged in all sorts of different ways, just on the feeling of the time. And then beyond that, the time signature is also shifting from a 6 that we had for a while and then pushed to a 4. And we constantly were jumping back and forth between these lows and these highs as far as volume and size of instruments, moving from the wide harmonies of the proggier section and the open spaces, the ambience of it all, to the more direct and groovy hard rock stuff. It's just a song that exists in so many ways, in opposite polarities, on so many axes, and they don't happen at the same time. It would just diminish the effect of everything. But it does want them both as simultaneously as possible, and so we're just getting whipped around into all these different ideas and atmospheres and feelings within the opening minute or so rapidly. It is a bonkers start to a track. But it does calm down. We do find a nice 4/4 to groove with, and we decide to stick with ideas for a little longer than a handful of beats at a time. And from here, the song begins to take form. It begins to take shape. And we introduce one of my favorite things on the track is the guitar solos. I think this is fantastic because up until these points, there are melodic ideas coming out of the vocals, but a lot of it is atmospheric stuff. It's the way that the song makes you feel, its textures, its emotions, it's the whiplash of all of it. And then the song sits on one idea, and this guitar comes in and then plays this beautiful melody. And it dawns on me, this is one of the first times we've heard a solid melody take the lead spotlight and just sit in it. There isn't any being whipped around. There isn't, play a couple of beats and then we're going to do something else and then you can come back and continue your solo, and then we're going to go explore something else, then you can come back. No, we just get an elongated solo section. And the melody writing is gorgeous. There's a little bit of showmanship to it, a little bit of faster noodling to show off, and not necessarily show off. It's all for the narrative of the song, but it allows the guitarist a moment to show off a little bit. But a lot of it tends to be laid back, easier to play technically, but I'd say emotionally resonant. It's really good storytelling. The pace, the flow, each idea moves into the next fluidly. There isn't any of this idea of, I'm going to do this concept for 2 bars and then this concept for 2 bars. And you can feel the invisible walls between the ideas. Everything flows here like a nice paragraph. Each sentence does have a period in it, but you can see that they all complement each other. And the larger paragraph is better for having all these ideas in it. It's all cohesive and flows. And that's what their solos sound like to me. It's just gorgeous and well written, well paced, great flow. But it's not entirely simple either. There is some flashiness that occurs in it in service to the song. We do end up getting to hear 2 guitar solos out of here, and both of them are phenomenal. I love them. Easily the highlight of the track for me is those. Not to diminish anything else the track's doing, but they just stand out. This takes us to our outro, which I was a little surprised by. Given the rapidity of changing ideas throughout this track, it was interesting for them to start it off with one of the most chaotic minutes and to end it with something that borders on, I don't want to say boredom. It is very stagnant, though. Last minute 10, minute 20, it's just one idea. Lots of vocals and a simple atmosphere. It is intriguing. This is where the Indian vocal delivery comes from. There are some harmonies in here, but nothing like the super wide 70s-esque stuff that we had at the beginning. The cool thing here, I think, is the counterpoint. Many of the vocal lines and some of the guitar work come together to create something that has 2 melodies bouncing off of each other, creating something greater than the sum of their parts. And we also introduce some light production techniques, such as the channel panning that we hear in some of the background vocals, particularly the one long held out vocal that starts on one side and drifts to another. It's a very slow drift. It's very difficult to hear the panning, I think, if you're not looking for it. But it's also not completely hidden. It's still a little obvious. I've been trying to piece all this together. Moonheart, Sunhead. I think the other line delivered in this outro was something along the lines of one in the same or something like that. They're both the same. I want to view it from a philosophical angle. where the moon and the sun are opposites, but equal. And the heart and the head would represent emotion and intellect, or emotion and, I don't know, factual observation. And that they need to be held to the same concepts, that they're similar. Um, and so viewing the song as something that moves from something chaotic to something almost meditative, I think has something to do with that. The song chills out over the 5-minute course. And I'm trying to figure out if it is supposed to be a study of humanity, of the self. No more speculation on the lyrics, though. Let's dive into them and see how all that relates to the wildness of the track. So there is an element of the exploration of the self in here, but it isn't quite where I expected it to go based on the title. We have 2 stanzas, and then a mantra that gets repeated at the end over and over and over, and a small little 4-line thing that happens in the bridge just after the spoken word, which we'll get to the spoken word, I guess. We'll talk about that in a second. The first stanza says, I let the moon in my heart. The second stanza says, I hold the sun in my head. Both stanzas are about what happens because this person allows themselves to have these. Now, it's all very metaphorical. It says, I let the moon in my heart to ventilate, an embryonic wisdom where I get to awake, a living flame, I turn the key, open the door, the atmosphere enters my home, 'cause the moon is inside my heart. This one, I'm not quite sure what it's about. It does speak about a wisdom that comes from allowing the moon in, though, to awake a flame within that lives. It it creates a key that allows them to open the door and allows atmosphere into their home. It makes it so that they can breathe where they're most comfortable. It says, I hold the sun in my head to self-contain, a coconut, a cocoon melts inside me. Protection is just a weight. I can be brave in gentle ways. Step out into the open space. I level truth when I hold the sun in my head. This makes a little bit more sense to me, and I like where it's going. Particularly the last 2 ideas, I can be brave in gentle ways. I really love that. It speaks about bravery not from a type of bravado to stand in the face of some larger fear, to be brave in combat or something like that, but instead to be brave in the way of being vulnerable, to open yourself up. It says, step out into the open space, eye level truth. I like this also because it implies that something is sitting out in the open. It's an open space, there's nowhere to hide. There's this truth that sits at eye level, but there's an implication that not everybody sees it. All you really have to do is look for it. If you're not looking for it, you're not going to find it. But it's there. It's easy to see. Everyone can find it if they want. When they hold the sun in their head, this is what they're allowed to do. I don't know if it's necessarily about the moon and the sun. The sun, I think, having this massive light source might lean into that. And when we get to the spoken word part, light becomes a very important aspect of that section, so it's possible. The moon would then just be the opposite, I think. That's my interpretation of why the moon is in here, because we're going to be talking about the head and the heart. The head holds the sun, so the heart must hold the opposite of the sun, the moon. And then we have the mantra, they're one and the same, moon, heart, sun, head. The idea that you shouldn't separate this. The wisdom of the emotional side of you, your heart and what it contains, the sympathy that you gain from that side of yourself, but also the ability to see truths, to rationalize, to create thought, facts, understand how things work, the scientific value of life and living. A lot of people tend to separate them. It's either factual or it's just your feelings, that kind of vibe. But they're not. They're the same. In fact, there was a study. It wasn't really a study. It was more of an observation after a situation a long time ago. I want to say like 1930s, but I could be very off on that. But there was a dude, I'm pretty sure this happened in America, where he had his emotional part of the brain damaged. There was a work accident or something like that, and it completely destroyed a portion of his brain that deals with emotions. And from that point on, his rational, logical side was damaged as well. He was never quite the same person, and he had a difficulty with decision making, even of a more rational side of things. It was discovered through this that we actually use a lot of our emotions, the way we feel about decisions, to inform our decision making. And so, not even just from a poetic side are they one and the same, but even from a scientific side, they're one and the same, which I think really shows that this works. The song is an emotional song telling you that they're the same, but we also have a factual side of things telling you they're also the same. It comes together really well, I think. There is a part in the bridge that I'm curious about its placement. I understand what it says precisely. It says, I'm black and blue, I'm broke and bruised, and I smile at fear. The idea that even though I get beaten down, I still try to find the bright side of life. No one's life is ever going to be perfect. I shouldn't let myself get down from that. I'm not quite sure where it applies to everything else. We do have positivity coming from our first two verses about how the moon allows them to have all of this greatness and the sun allows them to see all this awesomeness. And maybe it's just about perspective. I might be broken and bruised. That doesn't mean that I need to be broke and bruised, though. That kind of vibe. If I take a different perspective on it, things could be worse. So I'll smile at fear. I won't let it control me. The final bit here would be the spoken word. It comes from Alan Watts. Yes. It's an Alan Watt quote. It says, so far, so good. But the truth is funnier than that. It is that you are looking right at the brilliant light now. Now the experience you are having that you call ordinary everyday consciousness, pretending you're not it, that experience is exactly the same thing as it. There's no difference at all. This is an excerpt of a larger excerpt where he speaks about perspective. That you could look at a little plastic cup and think nothing of it, but it is a reflection of light. Light that, as he says, doesn't exist without you. As he says, a lot of things we have are through our experience and relationship to things. He says the sun isn't a bright light if nobody has eyes. Philosophically, we'll go with that. If a tree falls in the forest, no one hits it. He says if I hit a drum as hard as I can, but it has no drum head on it. It won't make a noise. If the sun shines, but no one has eyes to see it, it makes no light. He says the only reason that wood is hard is because we have soft skin. There's a relationship to that. He says, so it is awesome that us, being this organism, we call into being the whole universe of light and color and hardness and heaviness and everything. The idea that as infinitesimally, why can't I say that word? As infinitely small as we are, in the grand scheme of things, we also wield a lot of power over our experience with life. I don't know that I completely side with everything because there's a factual side to all of it, but there is also the philosophical side that I really like. I think it's a great perspective to have on things. As small as we are still great. And so I tried to apply the concept of perspective to Cynic's track. And I think that's where that bridge comes from. I'm black and blue, broken, bruised, but I smile at fear. It very much feels like, y'all remember Wreck-It Ralph? I may be a bad guy, but that doesn't mean I'm bad guy, right? That's what this feels like. I may be beaten down, but that doesn't mean I have to be beaten down. I can still have a positivity, a light that I exude. It's about perspective. And even applying this back to the verses, again, it's not about, are you looking at things intellectually? Are you looking at them factually? Are you looking at them emotionally or sympathetically? It's, are you looking at things? Are you finding the truth? The truth is not found from one perspective. It requires multiple. I think it would be even wise, possibly, to extrapolate this out from a single person's perspective to many people's perspective. The best way to understand something is to connect with people. I don't think that's directly stated in the track anywhere, but I think Cynic would agree with me that it's a good way to extrapolate the message out beyond the original intent and find something that is thematically resonant with the ideas here. Still trying to pair this back to the track though. I don't know. The mantra at the end feels like it should be more of a meditative idea, and I think the music does align with that, but it doesn't quite explain why the beginning of the track is as chaotic as it is. But I don't think I'm going to arrive at a conclusion on that right now. So, those are my thoughts. Cynics, Moon, Heart, Sun, Head. It's an interesting name for a band with this theme explored. It doesn't seem very cynical. Anyways, let me know your thoughts. What did you think about this track? Did you enjoy it? Anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to correct me on or expand on what I talked about? Give me your own thoughts, opinions, and perspectives on it. Toss all that stuff down in the comment section. For the second time today, you can check out my link tree. The link is in the description of the video. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. We do have a special selection. No, we do have sounds from my inbox coming up next. We got a repeat band there called Athenacy that we've checked out before on creator request, and 3 brand new smaller groups that I've never heard of before, so I'm pretty psyched about that. Stick around for that if you'd like. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.